recent years, France's geopolitical environment has dramatically deteriorated, with the rise of populism in all corners of the Western world, from the Brexit vote to the election of Donald Trump, the migration crisis in Europe as a result of the Arab Spring, and the subsequent Libya and Syria crisis have all created an atmosphere of insecurity. France has also deployed troops to Estonia as part of NATO battalions in response to an emboldened Russia. 12 months ago, in October 2017, the Ministry of Defence published a National Security Strategic Review that intended to address the most immediate challenges France faces, as well as a clear vision of long-term geopolitical and technological trends. I'm your host Kasim, welcome to another KJ Vid. Just before we begin, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can help to fund our videos and make KJ Vid self-sustainable. Sadly, due to the nature of our videos, YouTube consistently demonetizes them as they apparently fit in the politically sensitive category. You can also access our full reports and exclusive content by becoming our Patreon member from as little as $1 per month. In the Middle Ages, the empire that King Charlemagne built when he united much of Western and Central Europe back in the 8th century was divided. The western and eastern lands went their separate ways and became rivals. Ever since, France had two main enemies, both in close geographic proximity. The first was Great Britain, with whom prior to 1815 it shared the supremacy over the Atlantic Ocean and the domains beyond it. But after 1815, with Napoleon's complete defeat, Britain became the world's dominant naval power and consequently the main global power as well. Nevertheless, France still remained the main continental military power, and over time it did manage to considerably expand its own colonial empire, albeit less than the British. The other enemy, and the most important, was the rise of a new continental power, Germany. When Napoleon overran and abolished the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation in 1806, historians argue that it largely sparked German nationalism as a reaction against French aggression. Between 1864 and 1871, Prussia had a string of victories over Denmark, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and eventually against France as well. Under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, Prussia won the war and a victory over France, which allowed Prussia to declare the German Empire, unifying most of the German states, which had for hundreds of years been divided. The rise of Germany triggered an alliance between Britain and France that culminated into World War I and a victory for the Allies, before being humiliated by Germany again in 1940. In 1945, France was again amongst the victors and Germany lay destroyed. As the United States took centre stage, establishing international institutions and securing its political hegemony, France, along with Britain and Germany, became leading powers of the past and subjects of a new project to establish political and economic stability in Europe in order to defend the American-led West in the Cold War. A common European policy became the means for France to leverage continental power and remain a global player, albeit under the behest of the United States. But after a period of this new international configuration of powers, France, under the leadership of Charles de Gaulle, wanted to chart an independent course for France, in which European powers would not merely reduce to some sort of proxy states for the United States or the Soviet Union, but to become dominant powers once again and return France to its former international stature by withdrawing from the then US-dominated NATO alliance. De Gaulle wanted France to play a dominant role in European affairs, and he knew that this could be done only in an alliance with Germany. Although he advocated the European Union, de Gaulle differed from the extreme versions of European integrationists who saw a United States of Europe eventually forming. Like the British, whom he believed would always pursue their interests, regardless of any treaty, he was open to an alliance of sovereign European states, but not to the creation of a federation in which France would be a province. The descendants of de Gaulle accepted his argument that France has to pursue its own interests, but not his obsession with sovereignty, or more precisely, they created a strategy that seemed to flow from de Gaulle's logic. As de Gaulle had said, France alone could not hope to match the global superpowers. France needed to be allied with other European countries and above all with Germany. This foundation of this alliance had to be economic and military. So on 22nd January 1963, Germany's Chancellor at the time, Konrad Adenauer, and Charles de Gaulle signed the Elysee Treaty, establishing a new foundation for relations that ended centuries of rivalry. The treaty symbolises one of the strongest friendships between nations in history, but the Germans accepted that the French should lead politically even if the Germans would lead economically. In the following decades, the European project advanced whenever France and Germany could agree on a joint position, thus bringing other member states in line. France's presidents since the end of the Cold War, Jacques Chirac and Nicolas Sarkozy, believed that the Gaullist version could be achieved solely through economic ties. Ever since, France pursued the concept of economic, which lay at the heart of the European idea that evolved into today's EU. The early 21st century has been full of problems for France. France's unemployment flared up after the 2008 financial crisis, until a high of 10.6% in 2015. French public debt kept creeping up to reach 98.1% of GDP in 2017, making it difficult to conform to European requirements. Traditional parties suffered humiliating defeats after another, starting with Le Pen's strong performance in 2002 and the French public resounding no to the 2005 referendum on the European Constitutional Treaty, which put the European project on hold. Unfulfilled promises of equality and a strict interpretation of la laïcité, which is a French principle of secularism that largely excludes religious symbols from the public sphere, has also culminated into what has been described as xenophobic attitudes against France's Muslim minority, as well as rampant racism. Economically, on the world stage, France was fading. The French welfare model was deemed uncompetitive and non-reformable, and its unique assimilation model increasingly viewed as ineffective. France's share in the world's global output dropped by a third between 2003 and 2018. The country lost 8 ranks in the World Economic Forum's Global Competitive Index between 2008 and 2017. By contrast, Germany, the former sick man of Europe, having overcome the reunification burden, became Europe's leading and most respected voice. Then things got worse as terrorism took its course in Europe. Since 2015, 245 people were killed in attacks. 42% of French citizens say that terrorism is in their top 3 worries, a figure similar to Israelis, and in 2016, 88% were dreading a terrorist attack in the next few months. All of this combined led to the rise of far-right populism in France, just like it has in all corners of the Western world, from the Brexit vote to the election of Donald Trump. This led many people to believe that France may be shifting to the far right with the rise of anti-immigration and anti-EU Marine Le Pen and her nationalist rally party. But the pro-EU centrist candidate Emmanuel Macron won a decisive victory with 66% of the votes. One month after his victory, the youngest president of the French Fifth Republic proclaimed the beginning of a new momentum in France. Macron promised a new beginning in which France seeks to reinvent itself as a startup power that is agile, flexible, creative, and able to play great power politics, whilst leveraging multilateralism to advance both European and French interests. In a paper written by Macron himself, he outlines his vision for France's future of rebuilding a sovereign, united and democratic Europe. He talks extensively about the keys to European sovereignty, which involves establishing a common intervention force with a common budget and a common doctrine for action. He also addresses the European migrant crisis, in which he argues for even more integration of Europe and envisions to gradually establish a European border police force. A host of other issues he addressed includes climate change, the breakthrough of technological innovation, and the need to prioritise the Mediterranean and Africa in external policy. In Macron's outlook, a united Europe is the key to realising his vision. He believes that France needs to make the Eurozone the heart of Europe's global economic power and calls for common budgets, investments, taxes and even education. The context of Macron's staunch advocacy of multilateralism is that it recognises how the West's monopoly on international order is breaking apart. In a multipolar world with states like Russia and China who have radically different agendas, France is doing everything it can to preserve the international institutions that have monopolised world power since the end of the Cold War. When Macron met Trump last year at the United Nations General Assembly, in his first address to the gathering, he said, "Multilateralism is the most efficient way to face global challenges. It is the realisation of a vision of the world that protects us." France is not shy to use its force and has deployed armed forces in countries from Mali to Syria. The country spends a hefty sum on its defence budget, which will increase by 1.7 billion euros a year until 2023 and by 3 billion euros a year beginning in 2023, setting France on a course to fulfil the NATO 2% pledge by 2025. It currently has the second largest armed forces in the European Union and ranks amongst the world's top 5 most powerful militaries, only behind the United States, Russia, China and India. Recently, France adopted a fresh approach to its $12 billion Scorpion modernization program with expectations for robotics, vehicle cybersecurity and the delivery of new platforms. But according to Boris Toukas from the European Programme of the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, the country's transformation actually predates Macron. France's repositioning occurs as the post-Cold War international order is crumbling at quick pace. The United States, once a pillar of stability, has become unpredictable and less reliable. The European Union, plagued with internal disagreements and distrust towards democratic institutions, has yet to achieve significance on the world scene. Non-state actors and some revisionist powers such as Russia sow confusion amongst allies and destabilize the international security architecture. An old power with a varnish of modernity, France will keep struggling with internal centrifugal forces such as populism and national retrenchment, and intra-European competition for years to come. Faced with emboldened Asian powers and political turmoil in the Middle East, France abandoned unhealthy diplomatic and personal ties with former African colonies in favour of pragmatic economic and security cooperation. Taking advantage of a reformed military apparatus that allowed for more flexible force deployment, France focused on stability efforts in Central Africa and launched a massive effort on regional capacity building, military training and counter-terrorism in the Sahel, Europe's southern antechamber. In 2030, the population of France will reach 67.7 million, an increase of 4.4% from 2017. Although population growth will slow down over this timeframe, it will be faster than the regional average due to comparatively high, albeit declining, birth and fertility rates, lower death rates, and substantial positive net migration. Urban population will continue to grow rapidly at around twice the pace of population growth overall. Under forecasts, the populations of the United Kingdom, Germany and Italy would all decrease between now and 2050. In the case of the UK, from 59.4 million in 2000 to 58.9 million. France would then replace Germany, where the population would fall from 82 million to under 71 million, as the most populous country as the EU as it is now constituted. Economically, France is projected to be the 8th largest economy in the world in 2030, worth $3.4 trillion, according to a report by PricewaterhouseCoopers on the most powerful economies in the world by 2030. The EU's share of world GDP will drop in the future, lowering France's economic size relative to the world compared to today, but it will still be one of the biggest economies. But geopolitical power and influence is not just about the size of a country's economy or population. Russia is clearly one of the most important geopolitical players in the world after the United States, despite the fact that it does not have the second largest population or economy. But for reasons of political culture, strategic will, population, demographics, military power projection capabilities, geography, and a French history of being independent-minded, France will remain Europe's most important geopolitical player, both within Europe and the global arena. That's all for today guys, thanks for watching another KJ vid. We would love to hear your views in the comments below. Finally, don't forget to support us on Patreon so we can produce more of these geopolitical reports. That's all for today, see you next time.